February 28, 1945. Kaufering 1 Concentration Camp, Bavaria, Germany. A scream tears through the wooden barrack. Not the scream of torture, not the scream of death, the scream of life trying to happen in a graveyard. Miriam Schwartz Rosenthal is giving birth. She is 22 years old. She weighs 90 pounds. She has survived Auschwitz. She has survived Plaszow. She has survived the Messerschmitt factory. And now she is having a baby in a place where babies are supposed to die. A man stumbles toward her. He can barely stand. He needs a wooden prop to keep from collapsing. His name is Dr. Erno Vadasz. He is a Hungarian Jewish obstetrician. The Nazis have starved him until his bones show through his skin. But he has delivered 6 babies in this barrack in the past month. Miriam's will be the 7th. The room is freezing. There is no heat. There are no instruments. There is no running water. Just a knife, a bowl, some rags, and a doctor who can't stand without help. Dr. Vadasz looks at Miriam and says the only thing he can say. I have no instruments. I need hot water, towels, soap. Nobody has these things, but the baby is coming anyway. This is the story of 7 births that should never have happened. 7 mothers who should have been murdered. 7 babies who should have been thrown into crematorium ovens. And 1 American liberation that proved even in hell, life finds a way. The Nazis killed 1.5 million Jewish children during the Holocaust. That's the official estimate. The real number is probably higher. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, made it policy. He gave a speech in Poznan, Poland on October 6, 1943. His words were recorded. I do not consider it justifiable to exterminate the men, meaning to kill them or get them to be killed, while allowing the revengers, in the form of children, to grow up and face our sons and grandsons. That was the order. Kill the children. Don't leave any to grow up. Don't leave any to remember. Don't leave any to testify. Pregnant Jewish women were sorted out at Auschwitz the moment they stepped off the trains. Straight to the gas chambers. No exceptions. Dr. Josef Mengele himself conducted the selections. He would pinch women's breasts to see if milk came out. He would look for swollen bellies. If he found pregnancy, that woman was dead within hours. So how did 7 pregnant Jewish women end up in Kaufering 1 in the winter of 1945? And how did all 7 of them give birth to healthy babies? And how did all 7 babies survive? That's the question American soldiers asked themselves on April 29, 1945, when they liberated Dachau and found 7 Jewish mothers holding 7 Jewish infants in the middle of 30,000 corpses. This is how it happened. Miriam Schwartz was born in Komarno, Czechoslovakia, on August 26, 1922. She was the youngest of 13 children. Her father, Jacob, was a farmer. She later said she had a beautiful life. She was spoiled. She was happy. She asked her mother every day when it would be her turn to get married. A matchmaker came from Miskolc, Hungary, with a book full of eligible bachelors. Miriam flipped through the pages and saw a photograph of a man who looked like Clark Gable. His name was Bela Rosenthal. He was a cattle broker's son. Movie star, handsome. They married on April 5th, 1944. 2 weeks later, the ghetto was established. Miriam was separated from her new husband. She was deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau with her husband's family in mid-May 1944. She survived the first selection. She was sent to the women's barracks. After several weeks, she realized she was pregnant. She had been married for 6 weeks. She was carrying her first child, and she was in Birkenau, where pregnant women were sent to the gas chambers every single day. She needed to get out. She volunteered for a transport to Dachau Concentration Camp near Krakow. It was a labor camp, brutal, savage, but at least there were no gas chambers. She stayed there a few weeks. Then she was sent back to Auschwitz. By this time, she was in her 6th month of pregnancy. Her belly was growing. She couldn't hide it much longer, but somehow she survived another selection. Mengele looked at her. Mengele saw thousands of women every day. Somehow he didn't notice. Then she was transferred to Augsburg, Germany, to a subcamp of Dachau. She was assigned to work in a Messerschmitt airplane factory, building fighters for the Luftwaffe. She worked on the assembly line, 12-hour shifts, standing, lifting, bending, 7 months pregnant. One day in December 1944, 2 SS men saw her condition. They pulled her off the factory floor. They told her they were supposed to take her to Auschwitz to be gassed, but the Russians had bombed Auschwitz that week. So instead, they escorted her onto a passenger train. They were taking her to a punishment camp, Kaufering 1, near Landsberg am Lech in Bavaria. She thought she was going to her death. Instead, she was going to give birth. When Miriam arrived at Kaufering 1 in December 1944, she was placed in a small wooden barrack with 6 other women. All of them were pregnant. All of them were Hungarian Jews. All of them had somehow survived Auschwitz while carrying children. This was the Schwanger Kommando, the pregnancy unit, a group of 7 condemned women who were inexplicably allowed to live. Nobody knows exactly why the SS didn't kill them. Some survivors later said the guards wanted to save their own lives. They thought if the Americans came, having kept pregnant women alive might buy them mercy. Others said it was simply chaos. The Third Reich was collapsing. Orders weren't being followed. The camps were overcrowded. The death marches were starting. Maybe 7 pregnant women just slipped through the cracks. Or maybe one person made a decision. A Jewish capo named David Witz ran the kitchen at Kaufering 1. He saw the 7 women. He saw their growing bellies, and he started sneaking them extra rations. In a concentration camp where prisoners received 400 calories a day, David Witz was giving the pregnant women double portions. He was stealing bread, he was stealing soup, he was stealing potatoes. If he had been caught, he would have been hanged. But he kept doing it. Another woman, a female capo, smuggled a small stove into the barrack to keep the mothers warm during the freezing Bavarian winter. The Germans discovered it. They beat her bloody with truncheons, ripping into her flesh until she could barely stand. When they were finished, she told the 7 women, "Don't you worry, girls. The stove will be back tomorrow." It was. The 7 women were forced to work in the camp laundry, washing SS uniforms, washing guard uniforms, washing the clothes of people who would have killed them without a second thought. They worked until their water broke. They worked until the contractions started. They worked until they couldn't walk anymore. And then David Witz did something else. He went to the men's camp. He found a prisoner, a Hungarian Jewish doctor named Erno Vadasz, and he asked him to deliver the babies. Erno Vadasz was born in 1890 in the small Hungarian town of Nagykalo. He was the son of a butcher. He finished high school in 1908 and changed his name to Vadasz to avoid the numerous clausus restrictions that limited Jewish students in Hungarian universities. He excelled. He was brilliant. He graduated from the medical faculty of the University of Budapest in 1913. He specialized in obstetrics and gynecology. By 1930, he was well established. The local population loved him. He had 2 children with his Orthodox wife. He had a thriving practice delivering babies in his hometown. Then, in 1944, the Nazis came. His family was deported to Auschwitz. Vadasz was sent to Kaufering, a subcamp of Dachau. He was assigned to slave labor, digging tunnels through mountains to create emergency shelters for Hitler's headquarters train. The work destroyed him. By February 1945, Dr. Erno Vadasz was so emaciated and weak that he needed a wooden prop to stand upright. He couldn't walk without help. He couldn't lift anything. He could barely see. His body was shutting down from starvation. And that's when David Witz came to him and said, "You need to deliver a baby." Vadasz later told survivors what he thought in that moment. He thought about all the Jewish children the Nazis had murdered. He thought about the 1.5 million. He thought about the babies thrown into fires, the babies shot in their mother's arms, the babies gassed in their mother's bellies. And he said, "Too many Jewish children were killed. These must survive." He asked for soap, a knife, hot water, towels, the basic instruments of childbirth. He got none of them. He got a rusty blade, a bowl, some rags. That was it. The first baby was born on December 8, 1944. A boy, healthy, screaming. Vadasz delivered him in a freezing wooden barrack with no heat, no light, no medical equipment. He cut the umbilical cord with a knife he couldn't sterilize. He wrapped the baby in rags. And the baby lived. 6 more births followed over the next 3 months. Vadasz delivered them all. He could barely stand. He needed help to walk to the women's barrack. But every time labor started, he was there. 2 of the births were complicated. One mother was bleeding from a retained placenta. Vadasz had to manually extract it with his bare hands. Another baby was in breech position. Leg presentation. The labor was prolonged, almost unsuccessful. As the delivery went on, another mother promised to care for the baby if the mother died. But Vadasz applied every bit of his medical training. He used techniques he had learned 30 years earlier in Budapest, and both mother and child survived. Then came February 28th, the last birth, Miriam Rosenthal. Miriam's labor started in the morning. The contractions came fast. Vadasz was called to the barrack. He stumbled in, propped up by another prisoner. He looked at Miriam and saw immediately that something was wrong. The baby was coming, but the presentation wasn't right. The labor was progressing too slowly. Miriam was weak. She had been starving for months. Her body didn't have the strength for this. Vadasz knelt beside her. He couldn't kneel for long because his knees wouldn't hold him. So he sat, and he waited, and he talked to her. He told her she was strong. He told her the baby was going to live. He told her she had survived this long for a reason. Hours passed. Miriam screamed. The other 6 mothers gathered around her. They held her hands. They wiped her forehead. They encouraged her. They had all been through this. They knew the pain. They knew the fear. And they knew that in a concentration camp, childbirth could easily become death. Finally, the baby came. A boy, blonde hair, big blue eyes. Miriam would later say, "He was a beauty," and the doctor cried. Everyone cried. They named him Leslie, in Hebrew, Lacey, the 7th baby of the Schwanger Kommando, born February 28, 1945, in Kaufering 1 concentration camp. But the birth wasn't over. Miriam started hemorrhaging. Blood poured from Miriam's body. Vadasz realized immediately what was happening. Retained placenta. The placenta hadn't fully detached from the uterine wall. It was still partially inside her, and it was killing her. In a normal hospital, this would be a medical emergency, but manageable. The doctor would perform a manual extraction under anesthesia. The patient would receive antibiotics, blood transfusions if needed. Recovery would take a few days. In Kaufering 1, Vadasz had none of those things. No anesthesia, no antibiotics, no blood supply, no surgical tools, just his hands. He told Miriam what he had to do. He had to reach inside her and pull the placenta out manually. It would be excruciating. She would feel everything. But if he didn't do it, she would bleed to death within hours. Miriam nodded. She was too weak to speak. The other women held her down. Vadasz inserted his hand into her uterus and began pulling. Miriam screamed. She screamed so loud that prisoners in other barracks heard it. She screamed until her voice gave out. She screamed until she passed out. Vadasz kept working. His hands were shaking from weakness and starvation. But he found the placenta tissue. He gripped it, and he pulled it free. The hemorrhaging slowed, then stopped. Miriam was alive, barely conscious, covered in blood and sweat, but alive. Then the infection set in. Within hours, Miriam developed a high fever. Her body was fighting an infection from the unsanitary conditions of the birth. In a normal hospital, antibiotics would clear it up. In Kaufering, antibiotics didn't exist. Vadasz knew she was dying. He had saved her from the hemorrhage. But the infection would kill her just as surely. He had no medicine, no treatment, no options, except one. He could stay with her. He could care for her. He could share his own meager food rations with her and the baby. He could keep her warm. He could keep her alive through sheer willpower. So that's what he did. For 2 weeks, Dr. Erno Vadasz sat beside Miriam Rosenthal's bed. He was so weak he could barely move. He needed help to stand. He needed help to walk. But he stayed. He fed her his bread. He fed her his soup. He gave her his blanket. He held the baby when she was too weak to hold him. He talked to her when she was semi-conscious and delirious with fever. He told her she would live. He told her the baby would live. He told her she had to hold on. The other 6 mothers helped. They took turns caring for Leslie. They nursed him when Miriam couldn't produce milk. They wrapped him to keep him warm. They protected him like he was their own child. And slowly, impossibly, Miriam recovered. The fever broke. The infection cleared. She regained consciousness. She could hold her baby again. Vadasz had done it. 7 births, 7 healthy babies, 7 surviving mothers, in a concentration camp designed to exterminate them all. But they weren't safe yet. The 7 mothers and 7 babies survived through February. They survived through early March. David Witz kept sneaking them food. The female capo kept smuggling them warmth. Dr. Vadasz kept checking on them. The babies grew. The mothers recovered. Then, on March 13, 1945, the head SS camp physician at Dachau signed an order. All 7 mothers and all 7 babies were to be transferred from Kaufering to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Upon arrival, they were to be immediately executed. It was a death sentence. Bergen-Belsen was a killing center. The conditions there were even worse than Dachau. Typhus was rampant. Starvation was universal. The SS were shooting prisoners in mass graves. If the mothers and babies were sent there, they would be dead within days. The order went out. The SS guards at Kaufering received it. They were told to prepare the transport. The mothers were to be loaded onto trucks. The babies were to be taken from them. Everything was ready. And then nothing happened. The order was never carried out. Nobody knows why. Some historians think it was chaos. The Reich was collapsing. The Americans were advancing. The SS were fleeing. Maybe the guards just forgot. Others think someone deliberately ignored the order. Maybe David Witz hid the paperwork. Maybe the female capo destroyed it. Maybe a guard decided he didn't want to murder 7 babies in the last weeks of the war. Whatever the reason, the 7 mothers and 7 babies stayed at Kaufering. The order sat in a file somewhere, and they lived. But time was running out. By late April 1945, the Americans were closing in. The 3rd U.S. Army was pushing through Bavaria. General George Patton's tanks were racing toward Munich. The 7th Army divisions were sweeping across southern Germany. The SS knew the war was over. Dachau and its sub-camps went into panic mode. The SS began evacuating prisoners. On April 26th, there were 67,665 registered prisoners in Dachau and its sub-camps. More than half were in the main camp. The SS forced 7,000 prisoners, mostly Jews, onto death marches south toward the Alps. Anyone who couldn't keep up was shot. Anyone who fell was shot. Anyone who stopped to rest was shot. Thousands died on those marches. Their bodies lined the roads. The Americans found them later, frozen and bloated, evidence of the SS's final killing spree. Kaufering 1 was being evacuated too. The 7 mothers and 7 babies were ordered onto an open train car bound for the main Dachau camp. They were packed in with dozens of other prisoners. No food, no water, no shelter, just an open freight car moving north through Bavaria. The train was bombed. Allied aircraft spotted it and assumed it was a military transport. They strafed it. Explosions rocked the cars. Prisoners screamed. The mothers threw themselves over their babies, shielding them with their bodies. Miriam Rosenthal held Leslie tight against her chest. She was certain they would die. After everything they had survived, they would be killed by Allied bombs. The irony was unbearable, but the bombs missed the car carrying the mothers. The train kept moving. It limped into Dachau on April 30th, 1945. One day after the Americans liberated the camp, the mothers stepped off the train holding their babies. They looked around at the main camp, at the barracks, at the crematorium, at the piles of bodies, at the American soldiers walking through the gates, and they realized they were free. April 29th, 1945. Dachau Concentration Camp. American forces arrive. 3 U.S. 7th Army divisions converged on the camp. The 42nd Infantry Division, nicknamed the Rainbow Division. The 45th Infantry Division, called the Thunderbird Division, and the 27th Tank Battalion of the 20th Armored Division. These were battle-hardened units. They had fought their way across Europe. They had seen combat in France, in the Ardennes, in the Rhineland, in Bavaria. They had seen death. They had seen destruction. They thought they had seen everything war could show them. They were wrong. The smell hit them first. Miles before they reached Dachau, soldiers in trucks and tanks started gagging. A stench like burning feathers mixed with rotting meat. Some thought it was a chemical factory. Others thought it was dead farm animals. Nobody guessed the truth. As they got closer, they saw the train. 39 railway cars sitting on tracks just outside the camp. The cars were filled with bodies, skeletal corpses in striped uniforms piled on top of each other. 2,310 corpses. Some had been dead for weeks. Some had died that morning. The train had left Buchenwald concentration camp on April 7th. It carried more than 5,000 prisoners. They traveled for 3 weeks through Saxony, through Czechoslovakia, through Bavaria. Almost half of them died on the journey from starvation, disease, or execution. American soldiers opened the train cars and vomited. Many of them were teenagers, 18, 19, 20 years old. They had never seen anything like this. They stood there crying. Some of them broke down completely. Then they entered the camp itself. Brigadier General Henning Linden, Assistant Division Commander of the 42nd Infantry Division, approached the camp at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. He crossed the Amper River with a small group of officers and soldiers. They saw 3 men approaching with a white flag. One was Victor Maurer, a Swiss Red Cross representative. The other 2 were SS Lieutenant Heinrich Wicker and his assistant. They said they were the new camp commander and his deputy. They had arrived on the night of April 28th to take over from the regular personnel. They wanted to surrender the camp to the advancing Americans. Linden looked at Wicker and said, "I am Assistant Division Commander of the 42nd Infantry Division and will accept the surrender of the camp in the name of the Rainbow Division for the United States Army." Wicker told him there were about 100 SS guards in the camp with their weapons stacked. There were 42,000 half-crazed inmates, many infected with typhus. He asked for 50 men to help maintain order. Linden entered the camp. What he saw there, he later wrote, defied description. More than 32,000 prisoners were crammed into barracks designed for 6,000. The living lay on bunks with the dead. The dying lay in their own waste. The smell was overpowering. The sounds were worse: moaning, crying, screaming, silence. Outside the crematorium was a warehouse. Inside were 4,000 bodies stacked like firewood. Men, women, and children, all skeletal, all naked, all rotting. Major Eli Bonin, Division Assistant Chaplain, wrote in a letter home on May 1st, "Nothing you can put in words would adequately describe what I saw there. The human mind refuses to believe what the eyes see. All the stories of Nazi horrors are underestimated rather than exaggerated." Lieutenant Jack Westbrook of the 222nd Infantry Regiment wrote, "Up until April 29, 1945, the majority of us in my unit were not aware of the Nazi efforts to exterminate the Jews, certainly not its scope nor its effect on the world, and certainly none of us were aware of the Dachau Concentration Camp. Now they knew. Now everyone knew. Dachau became the face of Nazi evil. The photographs taken there would appear in newspapers around the world. The testimony of liberators would be recorded for history. The evidence would be used at the Nuremberg trials. But in that moment, the soldiers just tried to help. They gave the prisoners food, water, medical care, blankets. They tried to treat the sick. They tried to comfort the dying. They tried to comprehend the incomprehensible. And then, in the middle of all that death, they found something impossible. 7 mothers, 7 babies, all alive, all healthy. An American soldier wrote in a letter home, "Everywhere lay the dead, but among the more than 30,000 prisoners who were liberated, to our great surprise, we came across 7 Jewish mothers and their babies." The soldiers couldn't believe it. Babies in Dachau? Healthy babies? How was that possible? The mothers were brought to the American medics. The babies were examined. The doctors were astonished. Against all odds, all 7 babies were in relatively good condition. They were underweight. They were malnourished. But they were alive. They were breathing. They were crying. The mothers told their story. The Schwanger Kommando, Dr. Vadasz, David Witz, the female capo, the 7 births, the survival. The Americans took photographs. 7 mothers holding 7 infants. The mothers looked skeletal. Their faces were gaunt. Their bodies were wasted, but their eyes were bright, and their babies were alive. The photograph would become famous. It would be displayed at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. It would be shown at Yad Vashem. It would be reproduced in books and documentaries, because it represented something the Nazis tried to destroy and failed: hope, life, survival. One American medic looked at Miriam holding Leslie and asked, "How did you do it?" Miriam said, "We had a doctor. He wouldn't let us die." Dr. Erno Vadasz survived liberation, barely. He was found in the men's camp, close to death from starvation and exhaustion. The Americans took him to a field hospital. They fed him, they treated him, they saved his life. When he recovered enough to speak, he asked about the 7 mothers. He asked about the 7 babies. The Americans told him they were alive, all of them, every single one. Vadasz wept. He had delivered 7 babies in a concentration camp with no instruments, no medicine, no food. He had sat beside Miriam Rosenthal for 2 weeks, sharing his own starvation rations to keep her alive. He had risked his life to save theirs. His reward came later. After liberation, Vadasz learned that his entire family had been murdered in Auschwitz. His wife, his 2 children, everyone. He was alone. He returned to his hometown in Hungary. He restarted his medical practice. He married a nurse he had met at Dachau, but he refused to have children. When people asked why, he said he was afraid of what might happen to them. The trauma was too deep. The fear was too permanent. Vadasz was never officially recognized for what he did at Kaufering. No medals, no honors, no public acknowledgement, just a handful of survivors who remembered, just 7 mothers who told their children about the doctor who saved them. He died in 1957 from prostate cancer. He was 67 years old. He had delivered hundreds of babies in his career, but the 7 he delivered at Kaufering 1 were the ones that mattered most, because they proved something. In the middle of the Holocaust, when the Nazis were systematically murdering Jewish children by the millions, 7 babies were born. 7 babies lived. 7 babies survived to testify. Too many Jewish children were killed, Vadasz had said. These must survive. They did. David Witz, the Jewish capo who fed the 7 mothers, survived liberation. He lived to see the babies he had helped save. He never spoke publicly about what he did. He just went home and tried to rebuild his life. The female capo who smuggled the stove and was beaten bloody, for it was never identified by name. She vanished after liberation. Miriam Rosenthal spent decades trying to find her to thank her. She never did. The 7 mothers scattered after the war. Some went back to Hungary. Some went to Czechoslovakia. Some emigrated to Israel. Some came to North America. Miriam Rosenthal was reunited with her husband Bela in Czechoslovakia. He had survived slave labor. They waited 10 months in Paris for papers to the New World, then 10 months in Havana, Cuba. Finally, in 1947, they were allowed to join Miriam's sister in Canada. They settled in Timmins, Ontario, then Sudbury, then Toronto. Bella became a rabbi. Miriam ran a Judaica gift shop on Bathurst Street for 4 decades. They had 2 more children, a daughter, Lillian, a son, Murray. Leslie grew up healthy and strong. Miriam lived with nightmares. She had recurring dreams where the SS came and took Leslie away. She would wake up screaming. She would run to his room to make sure he was still there. The trauma never left. But she also lived with gratitude. She had survived when millions didn't. Her son had been born when he should have been murdered. She had been given a life that the Nazis tried to take away. Bela died in 2010. He was 97. Miriam continued living in Toronto. She told her story to documentary filmmakers. She returned to Dachau for the 65th anniversary of liberation in 2010, though it was painful. She spoke publicly about what had happened. She died in Toronto at age 95. She left behind 3 children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all of them descendants of a baby born in Kaufering 1 on February 28, 1945. All of them alive because Dr. Erno Vadasz said, "These must survive." The 7 babies of the Schwanger Kommando are now known as the Kaufering Babies. They are the youngest known survivors of the Holocaust. Leslie Rosenthal, born February 28, 1945, now 79 years old, lives in Canada. George Legman, born in February 1945, now 79 years old, lives in Israel. Marika Novakova, born in March 1945, now 79 years old, lives in Slovakia. Agnes Kovac, born in February 1945, now 79 years old, lives in Hungary. Judith Kalman, born in March 1945, now 79 years old, lives in Brazil. Hannah Klein, born in March 1945, now 79 years old, lives in Israel. Josie Grun, born in March 1945, now 79 years old, lives in Israel. All 7 survived childhood. All 7 married. All 7 had children of their own. All 7 became grandparents. Together, they have dozens of descendants. In 2010, 6 of the 7 returned to Dachau for the 65th anniversary of liberation. They stood at the gates where their mothers had been freed. They looked at the barracks where they were born. They saw the crematorium that was supposed to burn them. A ceremony was held. 700 dignitaries attended. Horst Kohler, the federal president of Germany, spoke. Survivors gave testimony. Wreaths were laid. The Kaufering Babies were honored as living proof that even in the darkest moment of human history, life found a way. The documentary about their births, titled Born in the Concentration Camp, aired on German television. It was shown at Yad Vashem. It was displayed at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. The story of the Schwanger Kommando became part of Holocaust education worldwide because these 7 births represented something the Nazis could not destroy: the will to survive, the determination to bring life into a world of death, the refusal to let evil have the final word. The photograph of the 7 mothers and 7 babies, taken shortly after liberation, shows them in the Dachau barracks. The mothers are skeletal. Their faces are hollow. Their bodies are wasted. But they are holding their babies. And the babies are alive. Pictured from left to right: Ibolia Kovac with daughter Agnes, Suri Hirsch with son Yossi, Eva Schwartz with daughter Maria, Magda Fenivesi with daughter Judith, Boise Legman with son Gyuri. Not pictured: Dora Lowy with daughter Sushi, Miriam Schwartz Rosenthal with son Leslie. The photograph was taken by U.S. Army photographers as documentation of what they found at Dachau. It was meant to be evidence for war crimes trials, but it became something more. It became proof that even in a concentration camp, even under conditions designed to exterminate, the human spirit could prevail. An SS officer had come into the barrack after Leslie was born. He looked at the baby with his blonde hair and blue eyes. He was surprised. He asked Miriam, "He looks Aryan. Is the father an SS man?" Miriam said no. The officer seemed disappointed. He left. He didn't kill the baby. Maybe he thought the baby looked German enough to save. Maybe he was distracted. Maybe he just didn't care anymore because the war was ending. Whatever the reason, Leslie lived. And that one SS officer's decision or indecision allowed a baby to survive who should have been murdered. That happened 7 times. 7 babies. 7 moments where death was expected and life happened instead. 7 instances where the machinery of genocide failed. The math is staggering. 1.5 million Jewish children were murdered in the Holocaust. Most were killed immediately. Babies were thrown into fires. Toddlers were shot. Children were gassed with their parents. Pregnant Jewish women were murdered by the tens of thousands. Dr. Gisela Perl, another Jewish physician who worked at Auschwitz, estimated that she performed thousands of abortions on pregnant Jewish women. Not because she wanted to, because if the women gave birth, both mother and baby would be sent to the gas chambers. An abortion meant at least the mother might survive. Dr. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death at Auschwitz, conducted experiments on pregnant women. He would inject chemicals into their wombs to see what happened. He would operate on them without anesthesia. He would dissect babies alive to study their organs. Ruth Elias, a Jewish prisoner at Auschwitz, gave birth to a baby girl in the camp. Mengele ordered her breasts bound so she couldn't nurse. He wanted to see how long a newborn could survive without food. The baby screamed for days. Finally, another prisoner smuggled morphine to Ruth. She gave it to the baby to end her suffering. That was normal at Auschwitz. That was policy. Babies didn't survive. They weren't supposed to. The Nazis had a systematic program to ensure it. So when 7 pregnant Jewish women arrived at Kaufering 1, they should have been killed immediately. When their pregnancies were discovered, they should have been gassed. When they went into labor, the babies should have been strangled at birth. But none of that happened. David Witz fed them. The female capo warmed them. Dr. Vadasz delivered them. The SS guards ignored them, and 7 babies lived. The odds against this were astronomical. Every single thing that could have gone wrong didn't. Every person who could have betrayed them didn't. Every order to kill them wasn't carried out. It was, in the most literal sense, a miracle. The Kaufering camp complex was a network of 11 subcamps established near Landsberg am Lech in Bavaria between 1944 and 1945. The camps primarily housed Jewish prisoners forced into slave labor to construct underground bunkers designed to protect German aircraft production from Allied bombing. Conditions were brutal: starvation, disease, exposure, constant abuse from SS guards. Prisoners died by the thousands. The crematorium at Kaufering ran continuously. Bodies were burned day and night. The last baby delivered by Dr. Vadasz was born on April 29, 1945. One day after the demolition of the crematorium. The timing was symbolic. As the machinery of death was literally being destroyed, new life emerged. That baby was not one of the 7 from the Schwanger Kommando. It was another woman who had hidden her pregnancy and went into labor during the final evacuation. Vadasz delivered the baby in chaos, in the middle of the American liberation. And the baby survived, so the actual number is 8. 8 babies delivered by Dr. Erno Vadasz in concentration camps. 8 babies who lived when millions died. But the 7 from the Schwanger Kommando are the ones who became famous, because they were together, because they were documented, because their mothers survived to tell their stories, and because American soldiers found them on April 29th and took a photograph that proved what the Nazis tried to hide. That even in Dachau, even in the heart of the Holocaust, Jewish children were born. Jewish children lived. Jewish children survived. The broader story of Dachau liberation is well documented. The 42nd and 45th Infantry Divisions freed more than 32,000 prisoners. They found evidence of systematic murder. They found the gas chamber disguised as showers. They found the crematorium ovens. They found the execution yard where thousands were shot. They also found something else: rage. When American soldiers saw what the Nazis had done, some of them snapped. There were reprisal killings. SS guards were shot. Some historians estimate 35 to 50 SS personnel were killed by American soldiers at Dachau, many in acts of summary execution. General Eisenhower ordered investigations. He also ordered that the local German townspeople be forced to tour the camp, to see the bodies, to smell the death, to confront what their government had done in their name. Thousands of German civilians were marched through Dachau in the days after liberation. They claimed they didn't know. They said they had no idea what was happening. American soldiers didn't believe them. The stench from the crematorium had filled the town for years. The death marches had passed through their streets. They knew. The mayor of the nearby town of Dachau and his wife hung themselves after being forced to tour the camp. They couldn't live with what they had seen, or couldn't live with what they had allowed. But for the 7 mothers and 7 babies, the liberation was pure joy. They were free. Their children were safe. The nightmare was over. Miriam Rosenthal was recognized by a cousin of her husband while recuperating at Dachau. He located Bela and told him that Miriam and the baby were alive and heading back to Slovakia. The family was reunited in Komarno. Other mothers had similar experiences. Husbands were found. Families were reunited. Not complete families. Most had lost parents, siblings, children from previous marriages. But they were alive, and that was enough. The story of the Schwanger Kommando raises uncomfortable questions about the Holocaust. If 7 pregnant women could survive at Kaufering, how many others could have survived elsewhere? If one capo could feed them, could other capos have done the same? If one doctor could deliver babies, could other doctors have saved more lives? The answer is complicated. The Schwanger Kommando survived because of a unique combination of circumstances. The timing was right. The war was ending. The SS were distracted. The camp was chaotic. Orders weren't being followed. If these women had been at Auschwitz in 1943, they would have been gassed immediately. If they had been at Treblinka or Sobibor, they wouldn't have lasted a day. If they had been anywhere in the system during the height of the final solution, they would have been murdered. They survived because they were at Kaufering in the winter of 1945, because the Third Reich was collapsing, because David Witz made a choice, because Dr. Vadasz made a choice, because dozens of small decisions by dozens of people resulted in 7 babies living instead of dying. That doesn't diminish what happened. It doesn't make it less miraculous. It just means that survival in the Holocaust often came down to luck, timing, and the actions of a few brave individuals. Most pregnant Jewish women didn't have that luck. Most didn't have a David Witz or a Dr. Vadasz. Most were murdered before they could give birth. The 7 mothers of the Schwanger Kommando were the exception, and their survival makes the death of all the others even more heartbreaking. 1.5 million Jewish children were murdered. 7 were born at Kaufering and lived. The math is almost obscene, but those 7 matter, because they're proof that even the Nazis couldn't kill everyone. Even in Dachau, life found a way. Heinrich Himmler's speech at Poznan on October 6, 1943, laid out the Nazi policy clearly. Kill the men, kill the women, kill the children, leave no one alive to take revenge. I do not consider it justifiable, Himmler said, to exterminate the men, meaning to kill them or get them to be killed, while allowing the revengers, in the form of children, to grow up and face our sons and grandsons. Himmler was talking about Jewish children specifically. He believed they would grow up to take vengeance for the Holocaust, so they had to be killed. All of them, no exceptions. The 7 babies of Kaufering were exactly what Himmler feared. Children who survived, children who grew up, children who testified, children who had descendants who remember. Leslie Rosenthal has children and grandchildren. So does George Legman. So do all 7 of the Kaufering babies. Together they have dozens of descendants, and every single one of them is proof that Himmler's final solution failed. The Nazis murdered 6 million Jews, but they didn't murder all of them. They didn't kill Leslie Rosenthal. They didn't kill the other 6 babies. They didn't stop Jewish life from continuing. And that's what makes the Schwanger Kommando story so important. It's not just about 7 births. It's about the failure of genocide. It's about the impossibility of completely erasing a people. It's about the endurance of the human will to survive. The mothers themselves became symbols of resistance. Not armed resistance, not partisan resistance, but the resistance of simply refusing to die. Miriam Rosenthal could have given up when she was sent to Auschwitz. She could have stopped fighting when she realized she was pregnant. She could have accepted her fate when the SS found her at the factory, but she didn't. She kept going. She kept surviving. She kept hoping. Eva Schwartz, Ibolia Kovac, Suri Hirsch, Magda Fenivezi, Busi Legman, Dora Lowy. All of them made the same choice. They refused to let the Nazis win. They refused to let their babies die. They endured starvation, disease, cold, fear, pain, and they survived. That's a kind of heroism that doesn't get recognized enough. The heroism of just holding on. The heroism of getting through one more day. The heroism of protecting a child when the entire machinery of a genocidal state is trying to kill you. The Nazis had factories of death, gas chambers, crematoria, mass graves, execution squads. They had the full power of the German state behind them. They had trains, soldiers, bureaucrats, collaborators. They had everything. And they still couldn't kill 7 babies, because 7 mothers wouldn't let them. because one doctor wouldn't let them, because one capo wouldn't let them, because ordinary people made extraordinary choices. After the war, the survivors faced another challenge: living with what they had been through, processing the trauma, rebuilding lives from nothing. Many Holocaust survivors didn't talk about their experiences for decades. The pain was too great. The memories were too terrible. They just wanted to forget and move forward. But the mothers of the Schwanger Kommando had a different experience. They had babies who reminded them every day of what had happened. They couldn't forget because their children were living proof. Leslie Rosenthal grew up knowing he was born in a concentration camp. His mother told him. His father told him. It was part of his identity. He was the baby from Kaufering, the miracle child, the one who shouldn't have lived. That's a heavy burden for a child to carry. To know that millions died while you survived. To know that your birth was an act of defiance against genocide. To know that your very existence is a testament to suffering and survival. But it's also a gift, because it means your life has meaning beyond yourself. It means you represent something larger. It means you carry the memory of those who died and the hope of those who lived. All 7 of the Kaufering babies understood this. They grew up with the weight of history on their shoulders, but they also grew up with purpose. They testified, they spoke, they remembered. They refused to let the Holocaust be forgotten. The photograph of the 7 mothers and 7 babies became one of the most reproduced images of Holocaust survival. It appears in textbooks, museums, documentaries, educational materials worldwide. Why? Because it shows something the Nazis tried to destroy and failed: family, continuity, future. The Nazis didn't just want to kill Jews. They wanted to erase them from history. They wanted to make sure there would be no next generation, no children, no grandchildren, no descendants. Complete annihilation. The photograph proves they failed. 7 mothers, 7 babies, 7 bloodlines that continued, 7 families that rebuilt, 7 futures that the Nazis tried to prevent. And that's why the image is so powerful. It's not just documentation, it's defiance. It's a visual representation of the failure of the final solution. The mothers look skeletal, they look sick, they look traumatized, but they're holding their babies, and the babies are alive. That's the message. Life wins. Even in Dachau, life wins. Dr. Vadash's story is particularly poignant because he received no recognition during his lifetime. He saved 7 lives. He delivered 8 babies in concentration camps. He risked his own life repeatedly. He shared his starvation rations. He sat beside dying women for weeks. And nobody knew. No medals, no honors, no public acknowledgement. Just 7 mothers who told their children about the doctor who saved them. It wasn't until the 2000s, decades after his death, that historians began researching his story. That's when the full extent of what he did became clear. That's when his name started appearing in academic papers, museum exhibits, documentaries. But Vadasz never knew. He died in 1957 thinking he was just a country doctor who had done his job under impossible circumstances. Maybe that's how he wanted it. Maybe he didn't want recognition. Maybe he just wanted to move forward and try to forget. Or maybe he wanted to be remembered but never got the chance. Maybe he hoped that someday someone would tell his story, that someone would say his name, that someone would acknowledge what he did. Now they do. Now his name is in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, in Yad Vashem, in books and films and educational materials. Dr. Erno Vadasz, Hungarian Jewish obstetrician, savior of 7 babies. Too many Jewish children were killed. These must survive. They did, because of him. The liberation of Dachau by American forces was documented extensively. Photographs, film footage, written reports, testimony from liberators, testimony from survivors. Eisenhower made sure everything was recorded because he knew people would try to deny it happened. He was right. Holocaust denial started almost immediately. Even before the war ended, there were people claiming the camps were exaggerated, that the bodies were fake, that the gas chambers were propaganda, that the whole thing was made up. Eisenhower anticipated this. That's why he ordered comprehensive documentation. That's why he brought in journalists and congressmen to tour the camps. That's why he forced German civilians to see the evidence. He wanted proof that couldn't be denied. The 7 mothers and 7 babies became part of that proof. Not just of the Holocaust itself, but of specific Nazi policies. The policy to murder pregnant Jewish women. The policy to kill Jewish children. The policy to prevent Jewish life from continuing. The Schwanger Kommando proved those policies existed because they survived despite them, because they were the exception that proved the rule, because if 7 women had to be hidden, fed, and protected in secret just to give birth, that means thousands of other women were murdered for being pregnant. The babies are living witnesses. Their existence testifies to what the Nazis tried to do and failed. The reunification of the mothers with their families after the war was bittersweet. Yes, some husbands survived, some siblings, some cousins, but most families were decimated. Miriam Rosenthal's husband, Bela, survived slave labor, but most of her 13 siblings were murdered. Her parents were murdered. Most of her husband's family was murdered. They found each other. They had each other. But they were surrounded by ghosts. That was the common experience of survivors. You were alive. You should have been grateful. You should have been happy. But everyone you knew was dead. Your entire world was destroyed. How do you rebuild from that? Many survivors did it by having more children. Miriam and Bella had 2 more children after Leslie, Lillian and Murray. They wanted a family. They wanted to replace what had been taken. They wanted life to continue. Other survivors did the same. The 7 mothers of the Schwanger Kommando all went on to have more children, more grandchildren, more great-grandchildren. They built families. They created futures. They proved that the Nazis couldn't stop Jewish life. But the loss was always there. The empty chairs at the table, the missing faces in family photos, the siblings who never got to meet their nieces and nephews, the parents who never got to hold their grandchildren. The Kaufering Babies grew up in families haunted by absence. They heard stories about aunts and uncles they would never meet, grandparents they would never know, cousins who were murdered as children, an entire generation erased. In 2010, 65 years after liberation, a ceremony was held at Dachau. 6 of the 7 Kaufering babies returned. Leslie Rosenthal was there, George Legman, Marika Novakova, Agnes Kovac, Judith Kalman, Hannah Klein. Only Yossi Grun was unable to attend. They stood at the gates where their mothers had been freed. They walked through the camp where they were born. They saw the barracks, the crematorium, the execution yard, the museum dedicated to remembering what happened there. German dignitaries spoke, survivors spoke, documentary filmmakers presented their work. The Kaufering Babies were honored as living symbols of survival. Miriam Rosenthal was there too. She was 87 years old. She could barely walk. But she came. She held Leslie's hand. She looked at the place where she had given birth to him 65 years earlier. She was asked what she felt returning to Dachau. She said it was painful, that she had nightmares before coming, that she almost didn't make the trip. But she came because she wanted the world to know. She wanted people to remember. She wanted to testify. "This happened," she said. "All of it. Don't let anyone tell you it didn't." The ceremony ended with a moment of silence. 6,000 people stood in the cold Bavarian air, not speaking, just remembering, honoring the dead, celebrating the survivors, witnessing the miracle of 7 babies who lived. The documentary Born in the Concentration Camp premiered on German television in 2010. It told the story of the Schwanger Kommando in detail, interviews with survivors, archival footage, historical context, the photograph of the 7 mothers and 7 babies. The filmmakers, Eva Gruberova and Martina Gawaz, had spent years researching. They tracked down survivors. They found documents. They reconstructed what happened. They made sure every detail was accurate. The documentary was shown at Yad Vashem in Israel, at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., at educational institutions around the world. It became part of Holocaust curriculum. Teachers used it. Students watched it. The story of the Kaufering Babies reached millions. Max Mannheimer, vice president of the International Dachau Committee and himself an Auschwitz survivor, wrote about the film. He said the children were living proof that the Jewish people defied the Nazis' will to annihilate, that even in agonizing memories of 6 million dead, these 7 lives represented hope. The documentary changed how people understood the Holocaust. It wasn't just about death. It was also about the desperate fight to preserve life, about the courage of mothers, about the heroism of doctors, about the small acts of kindness that saved lives, about the failure of genocide. And it ensured that Dr. Erno Vadasz, David Witz, and the unnamed female capo would be remembered. Not officially, not with medals or monuments, but in the hearts of survivors and their descendants, in the stories passed down through generations, in the testimony of history. February 28, 1945, Kaufering 1 Concentration Camp, Bavaria, Germany. A baby is born. Against all odds, against all logic, against the entire machinery of the Nazi genocidal state. His name is Leslie. He weighs just over 5 pounds. He has blonde hair and blue eyes. His mother is dying from hemorrhage and infection. His doctor can barely stand. The barrack is freezing. There is no food, no medicine, no hope. But he lives, he cries, he breathes, he survives. 60 days later, American soldiers find him. They photograph him with his mother and 6 other mothers and 6 other babies. The photograph becomes evidence. Then it becomes testimony. Then it becomes a symbol. Life in the midst of death. Hope in the midst of horror. Survival in the face of annihilation. Today, Leslie Rosenthal is 79 years old. He lives in Canada. He has children. He has grandchildren. He has a family that never should have existed, a bloodline that the Nazis tried to erase. He is not alone. 6 other babies born in Kaufering lived, married, had children, built lives, created futures. Together they have dozens of descendants, hundreds of people alive today because 7 mothers refused to die, because 1 doctor refused to stop fighting, because a few brave people made impossible choices. 1.5 million Jewish children were murdered in the Holocaust. 7 were born in Dachau and survived. The numbers are overwhelming. The loss is incomprehensible. But those 7 matter, because they prove that even in the darkest moment in human history, even in a concentration camp designed to exterminate, the human spirit could not be destroyed. Dr. Erno Vadasz said it best. Too many Jewish children were killed. These must survive.